Hi there, I'm Tiffany with Tiffany Lately, and today we have a guest, Daren, with Wasatch Freeze Dry. And we're just very grateful to have you here, Daren, and able to talk a little bit about freeze drying. Specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about freeze drying breast milk because that's kind of my niche. That's kind of the area of life that I'm in right now is a lot of freeze drying breast milk and a little bit about what that looks like and what goes into that. But I would love it if you could introduce yourself a little bit first, Daren, and tell us a little bit about what you do and about your business.
Well, thank you. So my name's Daren Jensen. I'm the executive chef and owner of Wasatch Freeze Dry, located here in Salt Lake City. We primarily produce food for a variety of different industries, senior care facilities, sports venues, restaurants. We also have a large following online for meals being purchased for elderly folks. So freeze-dried food that people will eat every day.
That is wonderful. And I just think it's the neatest thing that you're taking traditional cuisine and matching that up with freeze drying technology and making that more commonplace to where anybody can access it, whether or not you have a freeze dryer for yourself. And so it really is a cool thing that you're doing. And when it comes to specifically talking about freeze drying breast milk, it's just so good to the experience that you're bringing to this conversation is so valuable because something like freeze drying regular milk, if I mess that up, I can replace it. I'll go out and get another gallon of milk and I'll try again. But when it comes to freeze drying breast milk, you want to do it right. It's not something that you can easily replace. It's very precious, especially to a lot of mothers. You pour the work into it. There's a lot of protectiveness that goes into freeze drying your own breast milk. And so we want to make sure we're doing it right. We want to make sure we're not contaminating it or doing something that will make it freeze dry improperly. And so, I would love to hear from you, your thoughts about how to freeze dry breast milk, starting from the very beginning. What do you do to prepare the breast milk before you even put it in the freeze dryer? How do you prepare it?
Yeah, so breast milk is one of those things that are very delicate, so it's easily ruined. And because there's not a plentiful supply, you don't want to waste any. So doing it right the first time and having it so the value of it is exactly what you put into it. So your baby gets the most nutritional need out of it is very important. So doing it the right way, you're absolutely correct, Tiffany, that you've got to do it the right way, and it can be daunting for a lot of new freeze dryers to the business, and a lot of people get into it just for that purpose because they want to be able to maintain that freeze dried milk for the future, whether it's just for convenience or for disasters or preparedness in case things happen. So yeah, so the process that we've used, and we don't freeze dry breast milk a lot here. People will drop it off and we'll do it a little bit here and there, but primarily I consult on with people that want to set up a freeze drying business, and we've done a couple of the breast milk business, and so as we get into instructing on that, then there's some specific things that need to be done and addressed to ensure that the breast milk is safe and secure and healthy for your baby.
I've got this supply and I'm coming up to that year mark where they say that it lasts in the freezer to about a year and then it starts to lose its quality significantly. And so I'm kind of going from the very beginning and freeze drying that early milk and trying to get that saved so that it can have a lasting shelf life of, they say, somewhere between 3 to 5 years, if you do it properly and store it properly. But there are those who are interested in doing this and turning it into a business. And most of the time it's a business from home. And so is there like a right or wrong way to do this? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the biggest factor, or I should say caution, is you got to make sure that you don't taint the milk. You don't contaminate it. So using the appropriate cleaning methods, and we can probably talk about those in a bit, but having a procedure that you've written down that you can ensure that things are being done in a quality fashion. That's probably the biggest thing, especially with breast milk being delicate and doing it at home. It makes it a little bit more difficult to keep it contamination free. So you want to make sure that those processes and procedures are in place for you. Also, there's some licensing in depending on what states you're working in, whether you can do it under a cottage license or you have to have more of a manufacturing license like we do, affects where you should buy your breast milk if you're buying it from or having someone do it for you. So ensuring that it's contamination free. And that leads into kind of the process by which you should be using to ensure that you're not handling the milk excessively and damaging it or introducing bacteria or things in it that is going to be unsafe. So with that said, the first thing is understanding your freeze dryer and how to set it up and ensure that it's going to treat your milk in the most gentlest way possible with also accomplishing the task. So, and there's a trade-off. So on your freeze dry machine, you can set different temperatures. And so breast milk being delicate, I would use the lowest temperature possible, or at least somewhere between setting your dry temperature between 90 degrees and 125 degrees. So if you're using a harvest dry freeze dryer, the default's 125 degrees. It works. It's fine. But if you want to be a little bit more delicate to it, which will extend your dry times, you can drop your temperature down a little lower. And you'll have to look at your specific machine and what software version you're using for that setting, because they do vary depending on your software version.
Okay. What does the different software, how does that affect the freeze dry time and settings?
Well, older software will have different defaults. It will also have different capabilities of where you can put your temperature. So if you have any question, upgrade to the latest software. You can go to harvestdry.com and download the latest version. That's what I would recommend. The algorithms and formulas are all up to date, and they're going to be able to give you a more quality product. If you're on older versions and you haven't upgraded your machine, I would recommend that you do so, and then you would have the latest configuration parameters necessary.
Okay. And there might be some people out there who are like, 125 degrees, no, that's too much. And we've had some comments of like, no, 104 degrees, that's where we need to cap it and do it much less. But I was looking at recently when there was a need for breast milk donations. I actually spoke with some of these milk banks, and they actually do pasteurize their milk at, above 120 degrees, just to make sure that they, keep it safe, that there are no additional bacteria or something that they can transmit to the babies that they're donating this breast milk to. So it is safe, like it does work, and there is a chance you might lose some nutritional content in it, but it's not going to harm the baby. Like they're still going to get the breast milk, they're still going to get benefits from it. So you can do 125 degrees and it's okay. But ideally, like you said, if you want to be more delicate, then we want to go, ideally below 100 degrees.
Yeah, there's a difference between doing it for your own self and then doing it as a business. And if you're doing it as a business, probably additional research that you ought to use and really get into those type of levels, how companies actually go through and do pasteurization. But if you're just looking at doing it for yourself, those requirements change a bit. Now, obviously, breast milk is best at 98.6, right?
That's how it comes out, right?
right when it comes out. But for storing it and having it for use later on is a great value. So freeze
Mhm.
drying it, and I would recommend doing it at the lower settings. It is going to take your batches a little bit longer to dry, but still, I mean, you're probably not in a hurry, and you
Mhm.
want the best and the highest quality available. So turning your machine down to around 100 degrees and increasing the dry time wouldn't be an issue for my suggestion.
Okay, that's great to know. And it is important to remember what is your purpose behind freeze drying it in the first place, So if it's just to have that, kind of tucked away in the back for emergency purposes, or if it's going to be their primary source of nutrition and or you're going to be traveling with it, thinking about what is your purpose behind freeze drying, and that will affect, the mindset you go into with it about how are you going to process the milk.
Yep.
Um, and speaking of which, so when, say, the milk is in the machine, we've got it ready to go. I remember you mentioning in the class that the ice that gathers around the barrel, if breast milk has a high moisture content. And so if we load it too much and we create that ice around the barrel on the inside, then that can be a problem. So once the milk is in the freeze dryer, what should we be mindful of to be sure that we didn't overload the system? Or can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so each freeze dryer has a load capacity limit that you want to adhere to. So for a medium freeze dryer, which most people have,
Mhm.
especially in their homes, you're limited to 4 cups. You should limit yourself to 4 cups per tray. Um, and depending on how you're doing it, if you're saving it up, um, and I saw one of your videos about you slush it up and then you dump it into
Mhm.
the tray. You know, you want to be sure you don't exceed 4 cups per tray. If
And
you're
I am guilty of going way more than 4 cups because I'm like, I want to maximize this run and just let's get it as far as we can in there. And I've noticed that I've had some issues with drying it thoroughly. There are times where I'm like, I think it froze completely and I don't know what could be going wrong with this. And it just won't dry completely. And it could be that I'm just overloading it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's if you overload your machine, you could not only extend your batch times, but
Mhm.
the machine may have trouble um, creating, that finishing that freeze dry process because it's kind of like the igloo effect. Eskimos, they create igloos with ice to be warm in the middle. So what
Yeah.
happens to your freeze dryer is if your ice gets too thick around the edges, you will isolate that cold and you'll start thawing in the middle. Your
Yeah.
milk will start thawing even though it's 20 below
Mhm.
inside the cylinder. So you want to make sure that you don't overload the machine for the most effective use of the machine. And you may end up, if it's too overloaded, you would have to pull that out, put it back in the freezer, defrost your machine, and then start your batch again. And no one wants to do that, especially with breast milk, because it's so delicate. You want to get it in, freeze dry it, and then get it packaged as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And that makes total sense thinking back on my experiences. Like I wish I would have known that before because now I've got some bags that are freeze dried, especially my very early batches where I was still trying to figure out how this works and how to do it properly. And I've gone back and reopened some of those bags and I'm thinking, I know that breast milk can develop a kind of a lipasey flavor that tastes kind of rancid. But then I was like, but it's borderline spoiled, and I couldn't figure out what I had done. And I've kind of experimented a little bit with how to freeze dry breast milk, how to make it more efficient, optimize the process, make it safe. And I'm still in the process of figuring out what is the best way. And I've definitely noticed smaller quantities, it freeze dries more thoroughly, it freeze dries quickly. So even though maybe I'm not loading the machine as much as possible, ultimately I'm able to get it done quicker and go through more batches that way. And I know that it's going to be completely freeze dried. I'm not going to have issues with moisture content and stuff later on. So it really does make a difference. And I'm so grateful that you talked about that igloo effect, because I would have never thought about it that way, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I guess just to follow up on that, so a medium freeze dryer, 4 cups per tray maximum. A large freeze dryer, 6 cups of milk per maximum, or liquids in by volume. If you're using an XL, 12 cups maximum, and
Okay.
that will make sure that you're not overloading. So, and that's if you're pouring your milk directly into the tray and then putting your trays into your freeze dryer. There's another way of doing that, because some people I've heard complained about a metallic taste that comes out of that they may get off the tray. And if you've used the trays for other things, let's say you did a batch of onions,
Yeah.
previously, and it's like, oh, I got a bunch of milk, I'm going to do breast milk now. And even though you wash your tray thoroughly, you may pick up a slight flavor from your previous batch. So what I recommend doing, and I might have a sample here, or an example that I put together, and I don't know how well you're going to see it, but if you take, this is just a regular bag. It's a large bag. It's not a milk bag, but I was hoping it would, you could see it a little bit better. But what I like to do is if you have your frozen milk in your bags that you pump from. So you pump directly into the bag. It has a zipper seal on the top, just like this one. And then you pop and then throw it in the freezer. What I found that works the best, now, if you're doing bulk, and for a business or something else, it may not work as fast, but it's the easiest way to keep contamination free. So you're not handling the milk, but if you take the bag and open it up, and after it's been frozen, and then stick something in it that's also been sterilized, like a stick. This is a paint stick, but if you use like a chopstick or something like that, just to hold the bag open, and then set the bag in a slight incline on the tray, and whether you stick something, so the bag sits on it, so that when it starts melting, it doesn't come out. Then, and just freeze dry it right in the bag. So as long as that bag is open and you can get that evaporation, and that vacuum is pulling out that moisture, you will have a bag of powder that you can rehydrate right back in the bag. And those individual bags can be measured and tracked. You could put on the outside of the bag, when it was pumped, how much is in it, how many ounces, and then after it's freeze dried, you can weigh that bag after it's dried, determine the water weight, and that's how much water goes directly back in the bag. And then you can seal that bag back up and put an oxygen absorber in it, seal that up, and then put it in a Mylar bag. So you have that bag in a Mylar bag.
Oh, I see.
For storage. And what the Mylar bag does is it keeps the light from affecting the quality of the milk powder.
And so you're talking about freeze drying it within the milk bag that you pumped into. And then once that's freeze dried, you put the oxygen absorber inside that bag, seal it, and put that inside a Mylar bag.
Correct.
Okay. Do you need to do anything else with the Mylar bag as far as put another oxygen absorber inside of that, or is that going to seal and be good to go for the extended shelf life?
Yeah, because your plastic bag has an oxygen absorber in it, and it's sealed, then that's going to be sufficient for that. You won't have to do a Mylar bag. You're still going to heat seal the Mylar bag, because the zipper seal that you have on your plastic bags aren't exactly airtight. But with the But what that'll do is it'll keep it from spilling, but the oxygen absorber will also absorb any leakage from the Mylar bag and handle any of that oxygen as well over time.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have tried this method after you spoke about it the first time. And I found that it works great as long as you don't have a bag that has 8 ounces of breast milk in it. My
Stuff
smaller bags
about
that had like 5 ounces or less, it freeze dried completely. I love the idea that you can still let it go a little slushy because sometimes the fat separation in the bag can create a freeze drying issue where it doesn't freeze dry the fatty content all the way. So you could still shake it up, let it go slushy, and then tilt it upwards and freeze dry it that way. And as long as my bigger bags that had too much milk in them, now I know better, right? But those didn't freeze dry all the way and they gave me some troubles. But all of the smaller bags freeze dried perfectly. And I love the idea of being able to just, pull that out and fill it up with warm water. And there you go. You've just rehydrated your milk back to what it was when you first pumped into the bag.
Yeah, it does make it more convenient in those scenarios, and you don't have to do all the management of measuring and tracking the water content because you're doing that already. So really, there's several methods that work, but the biggest factor of how they work is how detail oriented you are on processing that method. So.
So I have so many bags. Like I mentioned, I've been pumping now for almost a year. And so I've got at least 6 months of freeze-dried milk that is not saved in small quantities. I was trying to save on how many bags I go through, trying to save money, right? And so I just
Yeah.
filled it up as high as I can go. For something like that, I mean, how would I handle freeze-drying breast milk that's in bags that are so full?
Well, in certain cases, you may have to dump it in the tray. If you're beyond capacity or there's not a lot of room in there to work, you could take it and slip a long ways if it's frozen. So it opens up that exposure and freeze dry it laying down with the zipper closed. So you basically have a long ice cube.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And then just leave it in the bag and open up the side of the bag. So you have a method by which the water escapes. Instead of using the end, you're using the side, but you're slitting the side. And then
Mhm.
that powder is going to have to go into, some other storage method.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of, I haven't uploaded the video yet, but that's kind of what I tried my last time was slitting it the long ways and it freeze dried completely. So it definitely worked that way. So after the milk is freeze dried, how do you go about storing it? We talked a little bit about putting it in Mylar bags, but I know there are plenty of people who prefer using mason jars. So what is the difference between the two and how does it affect storage time and how shelf life and all that stuff?
Yeah, so Mylar bags are made to keep the light out as well as keep the heat in. So, and what I mean by keep the heat in is when you rehydrate, you're probably putting warm water in it, and that's going to allow for the rehydration to act a little faster than putting, cold milk in it. But keeping that light, and light is one of the things, light and temperature is one of the things that really degrades the quality of freeze-dried food. So um, while glass mason jars are good for storage, they let light in. So you got to ensure that those glass jars are put in a environment to where you're protecting them from as much light as possible. So it doesn't degrade the quality of the food. Plus the portability for glass, if you're giving it to your babysitter or you're taking it on a trip, glass jars probably not the ideal thing.
Mhm.
So Mylar bags are a lot more portable. They're easy to rehydrate. You put your water in it. So really you have to look at your requirements, what you're doing with it, how you're operating in your family, and determine what's right for you. So they're not, there's not one preference over the other. Um, However, it's your preference and your requirements on how you're utilizing it.
Absolutely. Once you open it, how quickly do you need to consume the contents? I don't know if you have an answer to that, but say I open my mason jar and I'm starting to use it, how long would that keep?
Well, we're here in Utah and we have a very dry climate. So an open container is not going to absorb as fast as if you're in Florida or some type of tropical, environment. So, and that's going to be a big factor on how long it lasts unsealed. What I mean by unsealed is without sealing the top with a vacuum oxygen absorber inside to absorb all that oxygen. So if you're taking a bag, 16 ounces of milk powder, using 4 ounces at a time over a few weeks, in a climate that's like like here in Utah, you could zipper seal that and be fine. If you're in Florida where, the humidity is a lot more, then your degradation is going to be much, much faster. And that milk's going to rehydrate on its own if you don't seal that bag back up. Even through a zipper seal, it's going to um, degrade quite quickly.
Would it be okay to open it, use some of the contents, and then reseal it? So say you put in a new oxygen absorber or you vacuum seal it again, you heat seal a Mylar bag, whatever you did to originally store it. Can you do that again and then
Absolutely.
just make it last, kind of reset the button on shelf
Yep.
life with that?
Yep. It would just be like packing it up for the first time. So if you had a larger bag and wanted to use, pull out half of it, put it in a bag, and then just reseal, the rest. Absolutely.
I mean, I'm fortunate enough I have the equipment to do that, but say, you go through a company and you don't have the supplies, then, you might want to just consider freeze drying in smaller quantities so that you don't have large bags to go through, depending on how quickly you're going to be going through it.
Yeah, and actually, if you're using like mason jars, you can get on several different marketplaces, Amazon, and order um, vacuum sealers that just sit on the top, and you can vacuum seal that out again so that it will remain, um, you know, it will retain its longevity. So if you crack it open, pull out some contents, you can vacuum seal that back very quickly. And that's how you'd want to do like a mason jar.
That kind of covers kind of my questions that I have about how you freeze dry breast milk and how you would set it up and process it and store it away. But how do you suggest cleaning and disinfecting and maintaining the machine in between batches?
Yeah, so there's three steps I recommend in general outside of just breast milk. So after every batch, you should remove the door seal, pull out the shelving unit, and just take a terry cloth or a microfiber and wipe out the inside. So you're not like scrubbing and cleaning, but you're using the moisture that's in there to wipe down anything um, that's there. And there's stuff that you can't see. So in freeze drying, we deal with molecules. So we're pulling out water molecules that contain contaminants that will stick on the outer drum of the inside of the cylinder. So wiping those out every time will not only keep your drum clean and prevent things from building up, but also it will extend the life of your oil if you have an oil pump. Um, so just using that moisture that's in there, wipe it out each time is great, keeps it clean. If you have a spill or something bubbles up, using a 50-50 solution of water and vinegar is an excellent method. And then if you have something that's a little bit more, a bigger spill or an explosion, so to speak, vodka is the way to go. But the bottom
Okay.
line is you should not use anything to clean your machine that you wouldn't put in your mouth. So Windex, Clorox, anything like that, is an absolute
Isopropyl alcohol. I know some people
right,
have considered
right.
using that.
Yeah. So anything that you wouldn't put in your mouth, do not put in your machine.
Now, would you use the same method to clean the trays and the shelving unit as well? Or would you just use like a mild soap and water for the trays?
Yeah, I use a mild soap and water for the trays. If you're doing breast milk, I would probably rub them down with a vodka sponge just to make sure I kill everything
Mhm.
because that's one food that I don't want any contaminants in. So um and again, depending on your method, if you're dumping milk in the tray, I would probably wipe it with a vodka. And if you're putting the bags in the tray, I think a vinegar solution would work just fine because you're not really touching, but still you want to be dealing with a sterile environment.
Yeah, absolutely. How often would you suggest changing the oil? Because I have a Premier oil pump and the instructions that I got with Harvest Right is to change the oil after it's high moisture content. So I was doing about every five batches or so. I would filter the oil, put it back in, and keep on going. Um, but you did mention at one point that that may not be necessary, depending on what kind of pump you're using. You might have to handle it differently. Do you mind touching on that a little bit?
Sure, sure. So there's three different oil pumps available for the Harvest Right freeze dryer. There's a standard pump, which is a pump. It's an older pump. It's not offered anymore, but there's a lot of them out there, and you have to filter your oil every 2 to 3 batches. Sometimes you can get more depending on what you're doing, but bottom line is there's no getting around that maintenance level on the standard pump, and usually it's primarily all silver and you know who you are out there that has
Yeah.
um and so for economics, you filter oil, put that dirty oil back in, and that's your life. The next thing is the Premier oil pump. It has the large green reservoir on the front, and those are the pumps of my preference, and that's what we use here in our manufacturing facility. They're awesome. Most of the pumps that we run here probably have anywhere from 100 to 200 batches on the same oil. And you can achieve that by ensuring that you keep your cylinder clean and everything inside your freeze dryer clean, because those molecules that you're wiping out are eventually getting into your oil. So wiping them out will extend the life of your oil. So you don't have to, like the manual says, 20 to 30 batches. You can drive your oil longer, and especially if you're not filtering. And I don't recommend filtering your oil at all. It doesn't make sense to put dirty oil back into a machine. So only putting fresh, clean oil into your pump when you change it is my recommendation. And then you have the oil-free pumps. I don't recommend those. They're usually around $1,800, $1,900 every 2 years. If you use it on a regular basis, you have to have the bearings rebuilt. That's about a $400 bill. So they're expensive, they're heavy, and they're noisy. So for those that have Premier pumps, you're probably loving them, and knowing that you can extend them past 20 plus oil changes, you're probably peak dried up and go, oh, I want to know how to do that. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, it lasts a lot longer than you think, and I mean, is there some system in place that keeps the moisture from getting into the pump?
yeah, the Premier pump has a baffling system. So if you keep the cylinder clean, that baffling system separates the moisture that gets into your pump and degrades your oil. But if you overload that baffling system, then you can degrade your oil faster. So doing things like sausage that has a lot of fat in it will degrade your oil faster. I had a lady call me up, and she did a peach pie filling, had a lot of cinnamon in it. And that cinnamon, because it's so light and airy, got pulled into her pump and really degraded the oil fast. So the type of food you are doing does matter as far as how it affects the duration of your oil.
So if I do several runs with the oil that I currently have, what's a good indicator to know it's time for fresh oil?
Yeah, so the machine, just like your car, counts batches, and it will pop up a little message that says it's time to change your oil. Ignore that. So it doesn't know the condition of your oil. It's just counting cycles. So when your oil is ready to be changed, you will get an inadequate vacuum error on your machine right in the middle of your batch because it's trying to vacuum down. If that happens, drop out your oil, put fresh oil in it, hit continue on the screen, and you're off and running, and it takes 5 minutes.
Awesome. I love the simplicity behind it. And, filtering oil I was willing to do it, if it was going to keep my machine running and my oil pump in good condition. But, that's one extra step that maybe wasn't necessary to do. And filtering takes time, and then putting it back in the machine. I wasn't sure if I was doing it enough amount of times and all these questions that come up with it. So, it's good to know that it will alert you. It will tell you, hey, we're not vacuuming this properly. You need to change your oil. And that takes a lot of the mystery out of it. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for all of this information. I know you have the experience behind you, and we're just so fortunate to have you and be able to share your wisdom and expertise with us. It's something that this community of moms like me and parents who are just getting into the freeze drying, we want to be especially careful with the breast milk and make sure we do it correctly. So we sure appreciate you. Now,
Awesome.
before we go, are there any resources that you recommend? I know that you have a book that I actually purchased, Mastering Freeze Drying from Fresh to Forever. And this has been so helpful for me, just, the ABCs of when you're first getting started with freeze drying, talking about just settings to use for different kinds of foods, how to maintain it, some of the things that you touched on today, but in a little bit more detail. So if you haven't purchased this book from Daren Jensen, I highly recommend it. Do you have any other resources that we can refer to, or any other recommendations or advice for beginners like me?
Yeah, there's a couple things coming out. So you can get my book on my website, wasatchfreezedry.com. It's also available on Amazon. But we are developing right now a series of how-to videos that we'll be publishing relatively soon. They will be also accessible from wasatchfreezedry.com. It'll be a subscription model to where you can go in and really learn how to do things the right way. I see a lot of things on YouTube, and it's like, I hope people don't do it that way. So, if learning from, and a lot of the information from that book is from the classes that I teach. And I think, as far as I know, I'm the only one in the world that teaches freeze dry classes. And
Yeah.
so, and that goes back to my relationship with Harvest Right. I am a Harvest Right technician, and I do a lot of their warranty work for them out in the field. So, and there is an important understanding between the food and the machine and how it works together. And that's why it's very advantageous to look at the information that I provide because the machine, the food that you do affects the operation of your machine. There's a good balance there. Um,
Yeah, and
so yeah,
I'm fortunate enough to live in Utah where I was able to go to your class in person. There are many who, you could travel here. You're welcome. Welcome, come to Utah, come to Daren's class. But do you also have, classes that you broadcast that people can listen to from outside of Utah at
yep,
this
yep,
point?
yeah, those classes, and even if you're here in Utah, a lot of people don't want to drive a long way, and with traffic, it's getting horrible here too, right? So having those classes available online will be coming up soon, so that you can listen in on the classes, and we'll also be broadcasting those. So um, the next class on November 19th will be broadcast. You will need to go to the Food Storage Depot in Salt Lake City or email them. So if you want to write that down, Food Storage Depot. And I think their website is similar to that.
Okay.
And you can give them your email address and they will text you or email you the link to the class.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for what you do. You are very unique in this field. And so we'll definitely be looking into those classes. We sure appreciate you joining us today and for sharing what you have and keep doing what you're doing because we're just eating it up over here. We love it.
Awesome. I'm always happy to help.
We sure appreciate you.
All right. Well, thank you.